Hello, hi, and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Sarah, and this is Wicked Reading. So today's video is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about the books that I read in September. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to be doing some plant maintenance. I have a bunch of my house plants surrounding me. I need to do some multitasking. Some of these guys are suffering, so I need to go through and do a little bit of plant maintenance. So I'm gonna do some planty stuff while I talk about the books that I read in September. If you hate it, let me know and I'll never do it again. But honestly, sometimes wrap-ups in particular can be just a little bit redundant, a little bit exhausting to just sit and talk and not do anything else for like up to an hour sometimes. That being said, I don't have that many books to talk to you guys about today. September was a very slow reading month for me. I was in a little bit of a reading slump. I fear it may not be over, but I'm trying to force it to be over, okay? But let me share with you guys first my reading stats, and then I'll get into some plant stuff, and then we'll talk about the books in the order of which I read them. So yes, as I said, I did end up reading 6 books in the month of September, which equated to 2,176 pages. I had quite a mix of moods this month, but yet again, my top mood was dark, followed by tense, mysterious, and then there's quite a few other ones that you can see in there as well. Most of the books I read were actually slightly bigger books. 83% of the books that I read were between 300 and 499 pages, while 17%, which technically is only one book, was under 300 pages. For my top genre, again, it was horror, followed by romance and fantasy. And this month was also a lot more audiobooks, and that equated to 67% of the books that I read. I did read one book physically and one book through my Kindle digitally on Kindle Unlimited. I did rate all of the books that I read, and my average rating was 3.75. And more importantly, we had 2 5-stars for the month. Technically, one was a reread, so it doesn't really necessarily count as like a newfound 5-star, but the other 5-star was a brand new 5-star, and I'm super excited to talk about it. So let's get into the books and the plants. All right, I'm gonna change positions here. So I'm just gonna go through some of my plants. This guy, I love this guy, first of all, Scindapsus, but he is so leggy. Look at that. He's got like a whole foot of vine with no leaf on it. So I gotta trim him back. He's not doing great. As you can tell, his leaves are curled because he's very thirsty. But I do love this guy, and I have a few cuttings going that I will shortly be adding to this pot. Now, I should also preface this by saying I'm not like the best plant parent, Exhibit A. I do what I can. I used to be much more invested and much more into plants. There was a time of my history where I would buy really fancy plants, and I had like a full humidity, IKEA cabinet, the whole 9 yards. That is not me anymore. If a plant cannot survive off my sink water and survive with me forgetting to water it for 2 weeks, it's just not gonna be a plant in my house anymore. That's just the reality of it now, but I do what I can and I try. So anyways, let's talk about the books. So first book that I read was Touch the Night by Max Booth III. I have read a few of Max Booth III's works at this point now, and I'm starting to get their writing style. It's very zany, very goofy, and a little bit immature, if I'm being honest. And I don't know that I love their writing. It was like fine. So in the story, we followed 2 young boys. I think they're like 12, Alonzo and Joshua, I want to say. And they are 2 black kids in, I want to say in Illinois or Indiana, one of those 2 states. And small town, and they're just out hanging out and kind of getting into a little bit of trouble, some petty stuff, petty crimes. And it kind of goes from being petty crimes to being a little bit more severe. And their night goes very different than they initially planned. And in that, they end up getting pulled over by a police officer. And when he gets out of his car, something's up with him. He is not quite human, and he's very odd. And him and his police officer partner end up taking the boys away. and they end up in a situation that's very kind of bizarre. This book is sold as Stranger Things meets Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And while I do understand those comparisons, and I do kind of think that they're correct in a lot of ways through some of the elements. I mean, I don't know though that either, if you like either of those, you're like guaranteed to like this. But I can see where the elements kind of come from. So then we end up following these boys in this situation that gets more and more bizarre as the book goes. And we are also follow their mothers as they're trying to find them, because the mothers go to the police station and one of the moms is like, I saw you arrest my boy last night, I'm here to get him. And the town sheriff is kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about, lady. We do not have any young men here. Nobody's here. You got the wrong place. So now the women are pretty much trying to find their sons that were taken away by this possible imposter cop situation. And I really liked that aspect. I really liked following the mothers, and I liked the mother characters as well. What I will say made me a bit uncomfortable about this book is that there is a lot of use of racial slurs. And while I understand why they're in the book, Max Boot III is not a Black person. So it just like makes me uncomfortable to read. And like, I'm not the person to be offended by it, but I just don't think you need to do that to get the racism point across. While I understand why it's there, again, it made me feel weird reading it, if I'm being honest. So that was like an uncomfortable aspect to this book. I'm completely cutting this plant back because I honestly don't like this. I don't like this plant. It's like a pothos, I forget what they call it, like a joy something, I don't know. I don't like this guy. I struggle with him. I'm just cutting him back. I'm gonna make cuttings with it. Maybe just start fresh and see what happens. Anyway, another thing with this book that kind of goes along with what I'm realizing is Max Boot III's writing style is because we're following these 12-year-old boys, there's a lot of immaturity in the book. And not even necessarily from the boys, but there's quite a few moments of the book that deals with like feces and poop, and that is like just one thing I can't stand. I do not like that at all. It takes so much out of a book for me. Like Ninth House by Lee Bardugo, really enjoyed that story. There's a poop scene in that book that made me drop my rating. Like I cannot stand a poop scene. Poop scenes are not for me. I hate them so much in a book. So there's like a lot of poop scenes in this book, but I will say some of the body horror was like wicked, crazy wicked. And I enjoyed some elements and I enjoyed some scenes, but then I equally didn't care about a lot of scenes or didn't necessarily love a lot of scenes either. So I had a very mixed reaction with this book. This book, I honestly feel like I would have enjoyed better as a movie, as a gritty, gross, grotesque, nasty movie. It's just not the type of book I prefer reading. You know what I mean? It's not the story I want to read, but it would be a story I would want to watch. Overall, I did not hate this book, but it just like wasn't necessarily my favorite either. So I did end up giving it 3 stars. I do have it listed on my Pango because it's one that I also don't feel like I need or want on my shelves either, just because of like the mixed feelings I had with a lot of the stuff going on in it. So yeah, Touch the Night by Max Boot III, 3 stars. Here's my little, oh my God, I can't even remember its name now. I'm like so disconnected from my plants now. Syngonium, of course, but what are you? I forget, but it's supposed to be green and white, but my newest little leaf is only white. So I don't know that it will survive much longer. It's barely hanging on now. We got a single fucking leaf right there. Single stalk, single leaf. He's not doing too hot. He's got good roots. So I don't want to like, maybe I should downgrade him to a smaller pot, but he's got good root system. So I don't know. I don't know what he needs. Maybe less light, more light, who knows? But here's this guy. So moving on to the next book, I listened to the audiobook of Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I went into this pretty much just knowing it was like a cozy fantasy romance with like Regency setting. And that's pretty much what it is. We follow our main character, and she is like she's almost like cursed, I guess, by a fae. She was cursed by a fae when she was young, in which he pretty much took away her ability to express herself and have a lot of emotion and passion. So she's just this very apathetic type of character. And I really, really liked her character in general. I do feel like it was kind of almost neurodivergent coded in a way. And I related to her. I related to her inability at times to kind of show what she means and all of that. This guy also is very leggy. Look at that. I should cut him back quite a bit. But it sucks because he's got so much growth at the ends and just nothing there. So I'm going to cut a few little guys off him so we can maybe restart with this one too. Anyways, so I really, really enjoyed her as a character just in general. So I had a really fun time just listening to her and her story, I guess. So pretty much her story ends up being that she is kind of going away to, I want to say London, to like the London socialite scene with her cousin. Her cousin is like her closest person. And she's going there for her cousin because her cousin needs to find, you know, a husband or what have you, that whole Regency, London Regency era. And while there, she ends up running into a man. What is his name? I should have looked up people's names before this. I realize Elijah. I think it's Elijah. We're going to call him Elijah, okay? So she ends up meeting this man, Elijah, who a lot of people don't like. He rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but because of how she is, she really doesn't show that she cares or is put off by his behavior. So he's very intrigued by her. He's like a magician. So I will say the fantasy, like the magic in this world is extremely light. First and foremost, this is kind of more so a Regency romance with some magical, fantastical elements to it. But she ends up meeting this guy and, you know, romance eventually ensues. But what I really liked the most about the story is that a lot of the focus of the book is more so on our main character learning to love herself. She feels like half a soul, half a person because of this curse that the Fae put on her a while ago. So she's kind of learning to love herself and who she is. And I loved that. And the romance, while it was there, it was almost a little bit secondary. She was a little bit more concerned with herself versus having this romance work out, which I really loved that. But what I will say is at the end, there was some stuff that made it seem like that idea and that theme took a little bit of the back burner because there was just this tiny little thing. And I wish I could get over it. Pretty much if the epilogue wasn't in the book, I think this book would have been a 5-star for me. But the epilogue did something where it just kind of made me lose how much I loved that theme that I thought the book was doing. It just ended up doing something that I feel like took away from that a tiny bit. So I did end up giving this 4.5 stars, but I did really, really enjoy it. When I decide to read something that's like Regency based or very historical, I tend to always go for the audiobook because I love to have a narrator that has an accent and puts you in that era much easier than like an American accent or something. I love to listen to British accents and UK accents with historical London setting stuff. So the audiobook was fantastic. I really enjoyed the audiobook. I liked the secondary characters. I liked the cousin. I liked the friends. I liked pretty much everything about this book. There was just that tiny little thing at the end that took me out of it, but had a good time with it. Gave it 4.5 stars. All right, I went a bit heavy-handed. But that's okay. Once all these tiny little cuttings grow roots, we're gonna replant them and make this nice and bushy, okay? So moving on from Half a Soul, I then read Rain and Ruin by J.D. Evans. I read this on my Kindle through Kindle Unlimited. I really loved this book. So how do I explain what the premise is? So we follow our main character, Nami, which I might be saying wrong because I haven't heard anybody talk about this, so I don't know how to say a lot of the characters' names. Nami, something like that. So we follow our main character, Nami, and she is actually a princess, and her father, the king, is slowly losing his mind, not in like a crazy way, but in kind of like a way that mirrors dementia. He's starting to lose himself, lose his memory, forget who he is, that kind of thing. And she does not want to marry somebody. She wants to just be the queen, which was what her and her father's plan was. But because he doesn't have all of his senses and memories anymore, he doesn't really remember that. So he can't really go up to bat for her. And this book is extremely political. A lot of political scheming going on. The world is very interesting, and it's the type of fantasy and type of magical system that is based on mages. So she is a mage, and in this world, there were pretty much 6 different groups of people and groups of territory that make up the wheel. They pretty much, their whole world, their whole moral system, everything revolves around the wheel, and the wheel needs to be balanced. So the mages of territory 6 balance the mages of territory 1 and vice versa, how the wheel works out. So like fire mages balance water mages and so have you, so forth. So in this world, there was a war that pretty much split that up and made different territories kind of faction out, and now they are not being ruled over by one person, and it's not kind of the wheel's not intact anymore, okay? And there's like certain mages that were outlawed and this and that. So there's a bunch of like little like world and political things going on that I really loved. The characters in this book are so well written. The dynamics between characters, the relationships between characters are so well done. The motivations of the characters are very clear. They make sense. Everybody has such an individual voice. I just really found myself so enthralled with this book and this world and the political system. I don't think I would have considered myself somebody super into a book that focuses so much on political scheming, but the tension that this book brought out of me, there's so much tension just with the political stuff, but also it is a fantasy romance. So there is a romantic relationship aspect to this, that the tension there is crazy, so good. I really loved everything about this book. I loved everything about this book. I think it was so well written, so well done. My tiniest little maybe critique, I don't even know if I would hold this true for this book, but my tiniest thing is I do prefer a slow burn, and I wouldn't classify this as a slow burn because the relationship ends up being defined by the end of the book. But I will say, with the amount of tension that was built, it almost didn't need to be much more slower because the tension was so well done in the beginning. Because that's usually why I like a slow burn. I usually like a slow burn and prefer a slow burn because I like the tension. But the tension was just so well done that I almost didn't need it to be more dragged out. But that is my tiniest little thing. Like, it's not a slow burn. And I typically like a slow burn, so I don't know if I'm mad or not about it. Not mad enough to change my rating. I still gave this book 5 stars. Just absolutely devoured it. I was so excited to pick it up. Every time I set it back down, it was just so good. And I can't say anything else without just like repeating myself. But seriously, the characters were just so deep, dynamic, complex, well done, just all around so good. So good, in fact, that as soon as I finished it, I immediately bought the paperback version because I need to have a physical version. And then I proceeded to buy all the rest of the books that are currently in the series that are currently out. It is an ongoing series. There are 4 books out maybe 5. There's a prequel in there somewhere, but I bought all of the main books, and I do think that the other books may focus on some other characters. I'm not totally sure yet, but just kind of based on the covers and the vibes, I feel like the rest of the books may kind of, like each book may focus on different people. But I'm really excited to continue on with that series. Just so good. I'm so glad I read it. Shout out to my patron, Carolina. She's the reason that I read it. It was not on my radar before she mentioned it in the Discord group, and I owe you because so good. All right, so you guys can't see because it's on the ground, but I put all of those plants in this bin here. So I'm going to actually water them in the bin, let them soak for a little bit, and then they'll be watered. So here's my water, but I have to do some fertilizer because I have not done fertilizer in a long time. This is technically concentrate. It's concentrate of concentrate. So technically what you're supposed to do with this is take like 8 tablespoons of this, add it to another gallon jug, fill that up with water, and then water with that. But I'm lazy. So what I'm gonna do instead is just add a little drop into here and hope that it doesn't kill them. So moving on to the next book, which is, let me see, which is called How the Pill Changes Everything, Your Brain on Birth Control. This is by Sarah E. Hill. So this is a nonfiction book about the effects of birth control, pretty much. And it was very interesting, quite informative, and she just kind of talks about, you know, different aspects of how women or people on birth control, how their bodies and brains and chemistry and hormones and all of that, how it reacts and changes behavior, pretty much, mostly behavior-based. This is a mostly behavior-based type of book, and how it changes people's behaviors for better or worse. And pretty much brings up research papers focusing on exactly that, studying people and women on and not on birth control and how, you know, they acted different in different situations. Now, I will say I did learn quite a bit from this book, but I also did not expect it to focus so much on evolutionary aspect. And evolution is only so interesting for me because it's just very repetitive as it is. It's just very repetitive and it's a lot of the same stuff. It's just not the most interesting discipline of science to me. And a lot of the beginning of this book was extremely evolutionarily based. So I didn't love that. I didn't hate it, but didn't love it. Probably my biggest issue with this book, honestly, was the tone. It had a very strange tone to it. There were moments where the author would like say something scientific, and then she would say, well, hold on there, feminists, don't be mad at me yet, or something like that. And I was just like, what? Like, okay, the weird. And it was almost like I didn't come up with this. I read it on a Goodreads review, but it's so true. It was almost the tone of, I'm not a regular mom, I'm a cool mom. She's like, I'm not a regular scientist, I'm a cool scientist. Like, she would make these random, silly little goofy jokes. It was particularly noticeable in the beginning. She definitely laid off towards the end, but yeah, my biggest issue with this was like the tone, for sure. And it just felt a little bit patronizing at times, especially with the like those feminist moments. And there's a moment in the book where she talks about how vulva is such an ugly word. That's just probably not the attitude to have for the audience that will be listening to this and whatever. So I don't know. Yeah, I agree with the Goodreads review that the tone was just strange. But yeah, that's like kind of my only thoughts on it, really. I learned some stuff, but it focused a little bit too much on disciplines of science that I don't particularly find interesting. And yeah, the tone is probably the worst offense, for sure, for a nonfiction specifically. So I'm giving it 3 stars. I do think it's still worth listening to. I am in the sciences. I studied a lot of science, so I have like a very different standard, I guess, than a lot of other people probably do that don't necessarily study the sciences. I think that any normal person, just like a normal non-scientific person, would find a little bit more out of this maybe. I just felt like I wanted more of the physiology, and she gets into some of the physiology, but I wanted more of the physiology and just less evolution pretty much. So yeah, 3 stars. Okay, so now I'm gonna fill this with water. How cute is this little guy? And he actually might be a little bit too tall, but I'm gonna fill him with water and put some cuttings in it, and we'll start rooting some cuttings in here. So anyways, moving on. Next book, Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. So I will just say now that I did not like this book. You know, I have a full spoiler-filled reading vlog of me reading this for my bug tier and up on my Patreon. So that is available if you join my Patreon. And I go a lot deeper into exact reasons why this book didn't work for me and all of that. But overall, well, let me tell you guys what it's about if you haven't heard of this, because this is such a hyped book right now. So in the story, we follow our main character, who's actually a 8-year-old little girl named Bella, and we follow her POV as she deals with this entity that she calls Other Mommy. And this entity keeps asking her to let the entity enter Bella's heart. And that's kind of all you really need to know. So my biggest issue with this book is, well, let me just first say, actually, I did really enjoy the beginning. I think it has some really good creepy moments. And I think the audiobook was good. So there's its flowers. So moving on from that, this narrative style just doesn't work for me for this long of a book. This book is so long, it does not need to be as long as it is. Because because we're in the POV of a little girl, the only way we can get good information for the story to develop is from adults, either us overhearing a conversation or adults telling Bella stuff. That's the only way we can get information because of this narrative style. And because of that, it just led to a lot of awkward moments where the dialogue felt weird and clunky, and pretty much characters just had to go on monologues that were just so detailed and unnecessarily long, but they needed to be in order to get the information out there, but at the expense of telling a little girl way too much information. So I didn't like the narrative style because it just limited it so much and just led to the story doing a lot of things that I do not like to read. Another thing that I didn't like, which again is because this book is too long, not much happens. It's a lot of our characters running around. There's those moments of very creepy moments, and then between all of those creepy moments, our characters are just running around and like not really doing anything to move the plot forward or to figure out information. They're just running around talking to people they shouldn't be talking to most of the time, and I just didn't like the progression of the story. I didn't like the solution to the problem. I really did not like the story. And I don't even know what else to say about it. I mean, I said a lot more in my spoiler-filled vlog and get a lot more into it there. But yeah, overall, my biggest issue, the narrative style got old fast. I liked it in the beginning. If this was a novella, I think it would have worked very well for me. Unfortunately, I didn't like this one. A lot of people love it though. All my patrons loved it, and I wish I loved it. I just didn't. So womp womp on that as well, but 2 stars. And then the very last book was a reread. So I don't have as much to say about it, and that is Bunny by Mona Wa. This is my second time rereading it, so my 3rd time reading it. This time around, I decided to listen to the audiobook. The first 2 times I read it physically. And I will say, I definitely prefer physically reading it, The audiobook was good, like the narrator was good, but I just feel like I have a better experience physically reading that one specifically. I feel like I connect with the writing a lot more. I catch a lot more physically reading it and just connect with it more overall, just have a better experience when I'm physically reading it. Whereas like the audiobook, I can definitely see why somebody would be even more confused. This is a confusing book already. And for me, the audiobook even confused me. And this was my third time reading it. So I definitely don't prefer the audiobook for this, but nonetheless, I still love the story. For those who don't know, this is a very OG weird girl lit book. If you are someone who is just now wanting to explore weird lit, weird girl lit, fever dream feeling books, this is definitely a book to start with. It is not for everybody. It's a very divisive book, but it is one that I love. And it's one that's very difficult to explain, but we follow our main character, Samantha, and she is in this very exclusive writing group in a like master's, is it master's? In a writing program, a high level writing program. And it is just her and 4 other girls in her cohort. And the 4 girls are very cliquey and they call each other Bunny, and they are referred to as the Bunnies. It is sold a lot as the Heathers meets Mean Girls. And I do think that that's true in a lot of ways. It gives those vibes. It gives like dark academia, weird fever dream vibes, but it is a totally different type of book, totally different type of story. It's extremely unique. Again, very difficult to explain. It is an experience and you're either there for the experience or you're not. So it's definitely one to give a try if you're curious about that type of story. But yeah, I mean, I still love this book. It's still a 5-star for me. I'm not going to change the rating, but I definitely prefer physically reading it over the audiobook. So that's it. And now I have a mess to pick up, but I have all of these dead leaves to throw out. I have my cuttings. I actually have other cuttings that I'm going to have to find another jar for. My plants are soaking, and here's more mess. There you go. There you have it. So, but that is all to talk about today. That is all the books that I read in September. If you made it to this point in the video, leave me a crown emoji down below for Rain and Ruin. She's a princess. She wears a crown. Put a crown in the comments down below. Let me know what your favorite book that you read in September was. I'd love to know. As always, thank you so much for spending some of your time with me while I sit down and talk about books and do some planty things. If you haven't yet, please give the video a like, subscribe for future content, turn on the bell notification, all the fun YouTube things that help your girl out. And I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.